First of all, thank you, Alexandru, and thank you, Davida, for inviting me here to ACOL. I've never been here, and I've understood the school for many years remotely, so I'm very happy to be here. Well, I'm going to talk about as Alexandru described, I'm going to talk about the work that I'm doing right now at the American Academy in Rome. Am I legible enough? Can you hear okay? Okay, very good. This might be a bit of an experiment as well. Let's see, that's off. Good. Okay. The form of this might be a bit of an experiment, as I'm going to show things on the screen, and I'm also going to pick up some things here on the table, and I'm going to show them to you on a camera as well, because I figured that was kind of the easiest way to show what I've been doing, or the nicest way anyway. Okay, so with that, I'll start. This will probably be about an hour or something like that. Be nice if there are questions afterwards, so think of things. In 1965, Italian artist and designer Bruno Minari released the Tetracono with an event and exhibition at the Danese Milano showroom, inviting spectators to meet the Tetracono, as if it was a person. Instead, Tetracono is a product. It's an austere 15-centimeter black steel cube housing 4 aluminum cones. Each one's painted half red and half green. The cones inside are designed to spin at 4 distinct speeds on an 18-minute cycle. The function of this product, and I'm doing that in quotes, this product, is to show forms while they are in the process of becoming. So what I want to show tonight is a design research project. That title is a little bit difficult to know exactly what I mean by that, but I'll be more explicit. So it's both a historical digging into the past around this one particular not very successful object, and also making things as I go along, making things now. I'm less interested in the biography, say, of Bruno Minari or rehabilitating this product, as I am for using this as a kind of collector in a foil in order to think about my work right now. So what I'll show is the product of the last 4 months that I've been spending at the American Academy in Rome, reanimating this product artwork and using that process to think about the gray areas between art and design, which is where a lot of my work falls anyway. Okay. Before we meet the Tetracono, I need to introduce myself a little bit, so I'm going to show a bit of work to give some context for this. These will be relatively quick. I usually when I'm not in Rome, I live in New York City. I have worked as a graphic designer in New York City, independently practicing since 1999 in a number of different ways. I've also been teaching the entire time since 1999, most recently at Princeton University for the last 6 years. This is a picture of my studio space in New York. It is in a basement on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. It has 2-meter tall ceilings, so tall people have difficulty in this space. It's very tiny. It's also, you see the sign above is Dexter Sinister, and most of the work that I do is together with a partner, Stuart Bailey, who's also a graphic designer. He's based in Liverpool right now. We work under the shared name Dexter Sinister. I'll talk about some work that's Dexter Sinister. I'll talk about some work that's me only. I'll talk about some work that's made with 2 other people, and I'll introduce those things when I do it. But what's important is this is a small studio space in New York. And for contrast, I wanted to just show where I've been spending the last few months in Rome. The studio space there, quite different. Let's see if we can get this to work the right way. Okay, so I'm just going to show it like this. So this is the studio space in Rome, which is very, very different than that basement in New York. It doesn't have 2-meter tall ceilings. You notice you can fly in the space. It has much taller than 2-meter ceilings. It gives me a lot of room to kind of spread out the material I'm working with. There's a luxury of time I'm dealing with right now, which gives me a lot of space to just reset a bit and look into this one product from 1965 and kind of essentially meditate on it, think about it, use it as a productive object to make some new work around. We'll see the end of the video comes to rest here. Okay. Okay. So I'll show a few recent projects, or fairly recent projects, and show them quickly. This first one is an image. It's called WatchScan 1200 DPI. It's an image Dexter Sinister made to advertise an exhibition in New York. The exhibition was about time and the avant-garde. We were invited to participate as artists in the exhibition, and what we did was to suggest that we would do the graphic design for the exhibition as a work in the show. This is just my watch, which I usually wear. Which is here. Here is the real thing. It'll focus out. Oh, it's upside down. Nice. Okay. This is my watch. It's placed on a scanner for that image and scanned at a very high rate at 1200 DPI. Nothing else was done to that file that you just saw. It's just a scan of this watch. The result of scanning at such a high rate then is that the scanner head moves slower than the scanner head moves slower than the second hand. I'm going to zoom into it here. This is a file. And so you see what happens is that the second hand then bends in the image because it's moving it's moving more quickly than the scanner head is. And in fact, if you even look in close at the image, you see it separates out the red, green, and blue of the RGB scan that's being made. Now, this kind of thing is typical of the work that I like, and I like when I happen to make as well, which is work that takes into account its production process. In fact, kind of uses that as a platform or as a technique for making the work, more or less. Okay. This is the next thing I wanted to show. This is a watch. Designed also by Dexter Sinister. It's a product, a commercial product. It's sold in limited runs, but in mostly in museum stores and fashion boutiques, I would say. It's called the Watch Wyoscan. I'm going to show. It's a modified Casio watch. It's made together with Holmos, a production company in New York. I'm going to show you how that watch works. Oh, come on. Yeah. Maybe we're going to see might have to get more light on it. 1 second. See if that works. No. Okay, I'm going to show you it one different way. The way that watch works is like this. There. It slows down the display of the digits across the face of the watch, so that it's only drawing one segment at a time. That's it. It still works as a functional watch, but perhaps it maybe gets you to think about the act of just reading your watch. Simple thing, as if you might wear a watch anyway. Okay. This next thing is a publication. It's called Bulletins of the Serving Library. This is a publication, a journal that I do together with Stuart Bailey and with two other equal collaborators, which are Angie Kiefer, who is a writer and editor and co-founder of the Serving Library, and Francesca Bertolotti Bailey, who's a curator. This is issue number 3 of Bulletins of the Serving Library. It's also sitting here on the table, right here. So in this case, this is a book that I both collaborate on the design for, collaborate on the editing, and often write in this publication. And I think those overlapping roles are often part of my my graphic design practice. Okay. This next thing, this is an app. It's sold in the Apple App Store. It is an app called Multi. The full name of it is Multi a Multiple. You see it there. It works like this. That's it. It just sits there, and when it does that, and when you hit it, it stops and makes faces. That's pretty much all that it does. I was quite interested in making this and submitting it to the Apple App Store and going through the conversation back and through with them as to whether this was an app that they would accept for the store. At first, they rejected it because, of course, they said it was useless. But I would argue quite the opposite, that it's useful for some reasons that are less immediately clear. You can speed it up and slow it down. That was one feature I had added to it, which in the end allowed them to say, yes, we'll take it for the App Store. So that's Multi. And that project is produced through ORG, which is my small software company that makes and produces small things like this. Okay. This is a poster. It's a poster designed for a conference called Simplicity. It's on shared criteria in mathematics and art. It was really a math conference where they invited a number of artists to participate. I also did a talk for this. This is the cover of a magazine, Art in America, which features a font that Dexter Sinister designed. All the type that you see cascading down the page are all versions of one meta font, kind of rehabilitated computer program that we made based on a 1979 model. So this was the cover of a magazine. We designed it. We also asked them to use this typeface to set all the content of this issue. These are a series of 3 small publications, a book series that Dexter Sinister is currently in the process of designing with the Aarhus Art Museum and the University of Aarhus in Denmark. These are around topics in time. They're called the contemporary condition, and this is what they're about. They're short texts exploring the philosophical kind of edges of time, and lots of them have to do with software as well. These also use that same font throughout the typesetting of these, and on the different type for each book. Okay. This is a logo designed for an art foundation based in Paris and in San Francisco. It's the Caddist Art Foundation. This again uses that same meta font that I described before. In this case, we designed a logo for the Caddist Foundation, but we insisted that they would keep this logo for 10 years, which doesn't sound like that big of a proposal, but it's surprisingly difficult in the kind of fickle world of art institutions who mark themselves by the kind of flavor of their graphics at any one point in time often, or think they should anyway. We proposed that they would keep this logo for 10 years, and then we made a version of this same software font, which would run very slowly on a server for 10 years and make small adjustments once a month to the logo. So the logo would change very minutely over the course of 10 years. It's running right now. It's been running on a server since 2013. So if you go to caddis.org, you'll see the current version of the font. What I want to show you here is a sped up version of what it might run through. It runs randomly, but here's a kind of sped up version of 10 years of this thing and going through its versions. But at any one moment, it's one of these, and it only changes once a month, and it changes subtly. It changes only continuously from one to the next. Recently, they were redesigning their website, and there is some difficulty with what the typeface looked at that moment. But during the run of the design project, the typeface changed a bit over those times and kind of resolved the difficulties in what it looked like at that moment. So, working with art organizations, as I have a lot since 1999. It's evolved where many times, particularly Dexter Sinister, Stuart and I are being asked to also make exhibitions of our work. So this is an exhibition which was staged in Kunsthaus Bregenz in Austria, 2014. It's called Dexter Sinister at 1-to-1 scale. The exhibition consists of a projected animated piece of software, this asterisk, which speaks at you and tells you the history of what has happened in this exhibition space for the last 5 years. It's the same font that we saw before. This is another exhibition just about the same time, a year later, 2015, at Kunstverein Munich. This exhibition was called On a Universal Serial Bus. It was a collection of Dexter Sinister work for about 10 years. For that exhibition, well, this is a USB stick that we also designed and which was part of that exhibition. In fact, this stick, which I have here, I mean, it's pretty simple. This USB stick works as a catalog for that exhibition. In fact, this contains everything that's in the exhibition, but in digital form, because most of the work that we showed was video or software or things, or a piece of music was one. So this stick we then included at the entrance of the exhibition, just sticking into the wall. It wasn't actually plugged into the exhibition, but this was the conceit. And then we published this as a catalog with Sternberg Press, where it was just plopped into an envelope like this, and it was called Dexter Sinister Universal Serial Bus. Okay. Shortly thereafter, this is a design for a sign, a flag with a small art and graphic design space based in Ghent called 019. We were asked to design a flag for that space, very big flag, 7 by 10 meters. As it was a port, and we had just done the USB stick, we decided to give it a USB logo to mark the site of the space. It was rather oversized. Okay. This next thing is also a sign. This was done in Paris at the Pompidou Center. It was done for an exhibition. The sign that we made is down there at the bottom under the stairs. It says Fun Palace. That was the name of the exhibition, and we had a sign manufactured for it by the same state-run organization that makes the rest of the signs, the illuminated signs for the Pompidou and the entry space there. Okay, last piece of work I'm going to show. This is also a sign. This was done for the 2013 Venice Biennale. The work in this photograph is that glowing basketball scoreboard in the back. This displayed a changing graphic sequence of O, big O's and small O's, which also was the title of the exhibition of this pavilion. This was done by producing a small chip, which was inserted into either the scoreboard controller and ran the scoreboards at either end of this space to replace the regular time function with this kind of animated sign for it. Okay. So it's a piece of graphic design. It was part of the art show. It was in some gray area in between the two, I would imagine. Okay. So that's the introduction. Now I want to talk about the work that I've been doing in Rome. So this starts about 1962-ish. And it starts with this figure, at least as a starting point, Bruno Minori, who was an artist, designer, a writer, teacher, inventor, curator. This is a photograph of him just at least 10 years after 1962. But by 1962, he was making a significant call on his fellow artists to move their practices into design. He wrote in a translated essay in English, the title essay from this collection called Design as Art. I want to read a little excerpt from his call to kind of switch from working as an artist to working in the field of design. Okay. Today it has become necessary to demolish the myth of the star artist who only produces masterpieces for a small group of ultra-intelligent people. It must be understood that as long as art stands aside from the problems of life, it will interest only a very few people. Culture today is becoming a mass affair, and the artist must step down from his pedestal and be prepared to make a sign for a butcher's shop if he knows how to do it. Okay. So that was my entry point. Of course, in order to make the transition, Munari and others needed sympathetic clients who they could work with in order to approach design with an ambitious agenda. One that Munari found was the Gallery Danese Milano, based in Milan. It was a design gallery run by Jacqueline Vodos and Bruno Danese from the middle of the 1950s. About 1957, Bruno Danese sought out Bruno Munari, and he wanted him to contribute to his gallery. At the time, Danese was mostly showing and selling a range of handmade products, particularly ceramics. Munari suggested something else to Danese. He said, instead of working with these handmade objects, I have a design for an ashtray, essentially, and I'd like you to manufacture, industrially produce this product and sell it through your Danese company and through the gallery. Actually, I should show this. Yep. So I have the ashtray right here. It's in its box. Comes in a couple of small different versions. It's called a Cubo. It was manufactured in 1957. It's a simple industrial product, quite different than the handmade ceramics that were being sold through Danese at the time, among other things. So here it's in two pieces. You can see it. It's pretty straightforward. I only bought this one the other day in Rome, so it's still widely available 50 years later. Now, story is that Munari was not a smoker, and in fact he found particularly cigarette butts to be unaesthetic, and so he wanted to design an industrial product which would essentially hide the cigarette butts out of the ashtray, and he did that using this technique, which you can see obviously they stuff down into the tray itself. But more curiously, when I went to go buy this the other day, I found written on the side of the package, a little story that I thought I could read right now, and it just describes that in 1957, Munari met Bruno Danese and proposed he should make this cubic ashtray. Bruno Danese put the ashtray into production, and for a year or two it was decidedly unsuccessful, a flop. But with the insistence and due to its essentiality, this ashtray is still sold today all over the world. Is it perhaps a classic? So 50 years later, you can buy this in many places. Completely functional, industrially produced product. But what interests me particularly about Danese and Munari's overlap and working with the company is that they didn't only make commercial useful products. They also made, from the beginning, editioned artworks, small, multiply produced artworks, and until 1967 made no real distinction between the art lines and the product lines. So in any of these boxes you might have a screen print or you might have an ashtray, and there is very little to tell you the difference between the two, and I find that quite nice and quite adventurous. This is a photograph of the Danese gallery in Milan downstairs with the products kind of laid out, exploiting their industrial manufacture, the repetition. Okay. Now, this working in multiples and in serial reproduction was very important to Munari and very important to the rhetoric of Danese. I'd like to read you a small thing from this book, which I'll hold up here. Codice Ovvio, the Obvious Code, a book of work of Bruno Munari, and he writes in it a kind of typically succinct, crisp description of the difference between what serial reproduction was, what it meant to make things for, design things for production. So serial production is not reproduction. Reproduction implies that there is an original, unique piece, which is, as such, cannot be reproduced, but which production techniques try to imitate as closely as possible. Therefore, the reproduction is always inferior to the original, and its main function is documentation. On the other hand, production uses the techniques which are available to the artist today to manufacture a given number of pieces, not copies, without the existence of an original, which can be the same or slightly different depending on the methods of production, design, planning, etc. The number of pieces varies according to the techniques and subjects involved, from a minimum of 50 to an unlimited number in order to obtain more reasonable prices. Only those who mistake price for value are not interested in this type of production. Okay, I mentioned that at approximately the same time as the ashtray, as the ashtray was already becoming somewhat successful, another product, the thing I want to talk about, is the Tetracono, which was a product designed in 1965 by Bruno Menezes, by Bruno Minardi, and produced by Danese Milano. I had known about this product before coming to Rome in this January, but I decided this was going to be part of my research, and I found myself just absolutely only looking at this thing and using this as a kind of cipher to think about some other things, this product. So I had seen photographs of the object itself. Here's a photograph of it. I described what it was before. What's important to know is that here it is in some of its interstitial phases. So those four cones designed to turn at different speeds. It was described as a product which had a function. It was an aesthetic function. And it was designed to convey a philosophical attitude, which was described by quoting Alexander Dorner saying, "To see the universe as an indivisible unit of pure energy, which is constantly undergoing transformations." Now, this product was not very successful. It was not like the ashtray. There was a first edition of it made with 10 copies with motors, and which followed the scheme of movement which Minardi designed. There's a second edition produced, sold considerably less expensively. It was manufactured without motors, so it didn't even spin according to this design that was intended for it. Those were 50 copies of that was made. That was called the Tetracono SM. It was made for the Stedelijk Museum for an exhibition of Danese's products there. As well as the photographs that I'd seen reproduced, I'd also seen this diagram, this kind of drawing that Minardi made to describe both the relatively straightforward geometry, the schematic geometry of this thing, and the programming of it, the scheme for how it plays out over time, which is really what he was principally interested, or said he was interested in, with this product. Having seen this little bit of DNA for the product, I thought a nice thing to do would be just to simply to understand how it works, since I had not seen it moving, is just to get it running for myself, not as an end, but as a kind of means to think about other things. So now we're in 2017. We're in Rome, in the studio. First thing I did was simply work from this geometrical drawing to start to make a paper model of the Tetracono. As I did, I left the geometric description kind of in the model itself. So here you see me, here are some just printouts that I've cut up and assembled into a rudimentary paper model just so I could understand what this thing is and what it looks like. Leaving the construction lines in it just helped me understand a little bit about how it goes together, and there's some kind of elegant geometry that goes on with it. Absolutely simple, absolutely classical, which was chiming with me quite a lot with being set in Rome and surrounded by classical architecture, neoclassical architecture, and all the flavor variations thereof. Here is the model's kind of absurd, but quite useful. Here it is right here. It is just to set, anyway, it's very simple paper model. It did, however, help me to understand just a little bit about what it was like to deal with this thing. This is a half-size model, so it's still quite a small object. It's petite. Okay, there's the paper model. So I guess it was kind of nice for me sitting around the studio and thinking about these two kind of cubes as either ends of a kind of pole of utility, maybe. One being more conventionally useful than the other, although I would argue both equally useful. Well, putting together this paper model, then, as I was describing, of course, you start to see this repeated geometry all over the place. This is just sitting on top of a Bruno Minari designed cover for Umberto Eco's open work, which was in my studio. Very obvious things in Rome, which I'm able to see new through this exercise. The Pantheon, of course, first place I went on arrival. Neoclassical architecture, like looking out of the studio of the American Academy in Rome. Or this thing, which I quite like, which is a Renaissance piece, Francesco Borromini's forced perspective at the Galleria Spada in Rome. It is a construction which gives the image of a much deeper colonnade. Many people sure know this thing. But gives you when you stand in front of it, of course, it looks much farther off in the distance than it is. But it's fine. It's Baroque illusionistic architecture. But what I like about it particularly is that it was designed with to convey a philosophical attitude. In fact, the cardinal who commissioned it also commissioned a piece of text to be a moral justification for this work, which was you're supposed to contemplate it and think about the way that the world is an illusion and that all of your troubles of the moment matter very little in light of the spiritual plane, which is beyond. Take it or leave it as you will. But absurd. I like the relative absurdity of that. Or in other places, the floor nearby in Rome as well. Again, forced perspective and some of that geometry. Okay. Next, so I had an idea of the geometry of this thing. Next thing I did was to make I figured I better understand the timing of this. And Munari gave a clear diagram of how the timing of the spinning of the cones was to work. And in the first diagram, you see the relative rates of speed. So the first one is the fastest, 1, 2, 3, and 4. The top cone spins at the rate of once every 60 seconds. The bottom one at once every minute and a half. The left one once every minute, 12 seconds, etc. And the final diagram shows that 2 spin towards each other in either corner. Okay. So the easiest way for me to make that was to make a software model of the Tetracono. Which I set about to do, not without some difficulty. This is a kind of mistake along the way, which I'm always enjoying the mistakes, maybe more than the final working things. This was a Tetracono with the code going a little wrong. I did manage to make a software model, which I'm going to show you here. Pretty simple thing. Okay. So it's just a three-dimensional model of the Tetracono with the 4 cones rotating at the relative speeds which they're designed to rotate at. I was able to have this just up and running because what I was interested in understanding was something about the patterns, the timing patterns that exist between the different ways the cones turned. Also, in making this, I realized something I wasn't immediately thinking about was the fact that the thing itself is two-sided. It's like a Janus-faced object, and so on the back side, it shows you the opposite of what you're seeing on the front side. Finally, you can kind of zoom in on it, finding that useful. And then I could speed up the rate of it, which gave me a kind of more intuitive feeling about the ways in which the rates of change were happening on the 4 cones. So I would leave this up. This would just be running in the studio on my computer at all times, enjoying that. Like the geometry, you start to think about temporal patterns of shifting, aligning, etc., and start to see those around as well. This table was on an overnight ferry that I took, and I sat there staring at this table for an ungodly amount of time as I was trying to find some sleep in between things. But I wish this thing would change like the Tetracono. Did not ever change. Or this is a cortile, this is at a church in Rome, San Cecilia, and that church is on a typically layered site that was built as a Roman house and then a temple and then a Christian church on top of it. It's in the courtyard. Or this is in another courtyard at the Palazzo Altemps, Renaissance Palazzo. Okay. enough of that. I figured now the next step in my kind of what I wanted to do was get my hands on an actual Tetracono. And I did a bit of poking around with help from Davida, among others. And eventually located a Tetracono by emailing and talking to people on the telephone in Milan, somebody who would let me come use it. Andrea Moscardi, who has a private collection of design objects from the 20th century, Italian design objects. He makes his living by renting them out as prop rental for photo shoots, although he does not rent out the Tetracono, as it turns out. But he was very generous and happy to host me in Milan. I took a train and he picked me up at the station, drove me out to a kind of northeast edge by some train tracks, and led me to the basement of a housing block. And we went in through this basement door. I was kind of surprised to walk in and find the Tetracono in there all set up for me. I was quite happy to find that. And I spent that morning and afternoon, making a set of photographs of the non-moving Tetracono. So here's a setup of making the photographs. Here are a couple of the photographs of the cones in interstitial positions. And I made a proof of concept of just kind of running those cones together to make a short video, because at this point I realized what I wanted to do is just see the real thing moving, as it never actually did. I thought that was useful anyway for me. I returned from Milan and went back to work in the studio. And again, this is I kind of alternate, flip-flop back and forth between understanding the historical settings of when this thing was made and ignoring those completely in order to make new work myself. So in the studio, every day at noon, my day is punctuated by this sound which I hear. We're going to go back and turn the volume way up. This sound that I hear, it's the sound of a cannon, shoots off every day at noon off the top of the Gianicolo Hill over Rome. This is a recording made by a composer who I've met at the American Academy in Rome named Christopher Trapani. Chris recorded the cannon and then slowed down that recording 2 times and then slowed it down to 3 times speed as well. I thought it was quite beautiful. But further than that, I had this kind of visceral sense of that sound repeating every day for myself. And so when I heard it slowed down, it was like as if my days were slowing down, and quite like that. The cannon was set up in the middle of the 19th century in order to coordinate the church bells, so they would all ring at the same time. So it was set up as a kind of clock of sorts too. Chris and I discussed this a bit, and in fact, about that time anyway, he had seen me show a little bit about the Tetracono and its scheme, and he said, we should make a piece of music around the logic of this thing. And that's something that we are in the midst of making, which will be performed in New York probably in the fall. Chris is composing the music. I'm just kind of giving him the material to work with. It will likely be a 4-channel piece. I think it's going to include human voices. We'll see. I'm sure it will be beautiful knowing his other music. One thing Chris needed to know was, however, he was interested to know how much red was visible on the front of the Tetracono at any one moment. He was going to use that as a kind of scheme for writing the music. So the next model I made was a mathematical model of the Tetracono, which I'd really made in making the software thing. But in order to just understand, since these things are turning on circles, they have circles as their base, they're cones. What you see on the front of it is not a continuous linear progression from green to red, but rather a different progression. So I made a mathematical model to just understand how the 4 cones turn and how they line up at various points in time, and how much red you see on the face, which I then gave to Chris and becomes the basis of the musical scheme that he's setting. In doing this, I learned a bit about the way in which, one thing, since these cones turn on circles, they produce sine waves, which is kind of quite a beautiful movement of the way that those cones proceed across. And they also line up, they come into and out of phase at various moments across the 18-minute cycle, which you see here in this graph. From that model, I was able to make a kind of map of the front of the Tetracono to understand where to align the cones when I went back to make more photographs of the front of it, so I could really animate this thing. Now, this was also, I had to take into account how fine I could actually, with my motor skills, move the cones in making these photographs. But I made this temporal map of the face of it. And I returned back to the basement in Milan with a kind of more concerted photographic setup, which let me lay over that time map over to the front of the camera, line up the Tetracono in it, which is fussy and more challenging than I thought it might be. And then I proceeded to make a series of photographs of the cones in their intermediate positions so that I could then come back to Rome and animate those things. Here are some excerpts of the many. It was kind of a day of backbreaking work and with lots of fits and starts to get them just right. I was moving each one not in different rates, but at the same rate, and then I would do a bit of work in post-production to make them animate at the right rates. So after I had all this body photographs, I came back to Rome, put them together into After Effects, and made this. I'm going to show you this video, which is sped up to be so that we can watch it now, so that 2 seconds equals a minute of the cones animated to make the entire cycle. So this goes for about a minute, this video. So there's the first cone spinning, there's the rate of the second cone spinning, the third is added, and the fourth, and then the entire image, and we're going to watch it go through the whole thing. Start to get a feeling of the ways in which these patterns line up and come into and out of alignment, which I really like, which is what I'm sure part of what draws me to this object. But you have to have a tolerance for this kind of thing. I mean, I like watching lots of slow things. Okay, there it is. It kind of pops back into alignment at the very last minute, and I can't help but show you that little end sequence again, because you never think it's going to go to green. Whoops. Okay, forget it. Never mind. It pops into green at the last minute. It's quite lovely. I go on, continue my story, I think. My next stop was at the Fondazione Jacqueline Vodos and Bruno Danese, based in Milan. This is the foundation and houses the archives of the Danese Milano company, which was sold by Bruno Danese and Jacqueline Vodos in 1992. It continues today. It's changed ownerships a couple of times in the meantime. I was introduced to this place, and the person who runs it was very generous with her time, Manuela Serino, very generous with her time in welcoming me in. I walked in the front door, greeted by a painting made by Bruno Monati for the entranceway, which precisely fits the entranceway as well. I thought that was a good sign. The space itself, gorgeous residential space, was used as an exhibition space for Danese towards the end of their ownership. Right now, it's in a state of limbo, and in fact, I didn't realize it at the time, but Bruno Danese had only passed away in November, and so the space was in a kind of in-between state at this moment. Manuela comes in 1 day a week, typically, and manages the archives and keeps it running, loans pieces to exhibitions, does the work of the Fondazione. It has a nicely, I think, kind of ad hoc quality to it. So this is just opposite the Munari painting at the entranceway, and there's a photocopier and, a couple other Danese products as well being used for what they're supposed to be used for. What I wanted to look at there is I wanted to look at their printed archive. So I figured that was a good place to understand a little bit around how the Tetracono was introduced, the language that was given to it, etc. I started pouring through some of their printed matters, and there I found a couple of small printed objects that were around the Tetracono, one of which was the small brochure, which I'm going to show you here. Small brochure announces the edition of the product. This is my photocopied, assembled version, which actually I quite like, with its roughness. This has some curious aspects to it. One of which is that it lists not only the weight of the thing and the size of the thing. This is for the moving Tetracono, the first edition. But it also lists a temporal dimension for this object of 1080 seconds, or 18 minutes. I thought that was quite a nice thing. There's a second. There are a number of other pieces I found, but one other I thought was really useful was an announcement for the exhibition when the product was launched. And in fact, when Bruno Minotti invited people to come and meet the Tetracono. This is that object. In that, I thought I learned something from the primary material. I learned that during the exhibition, which consisted of a number of these Tetraconos in the Danese showroom, there was also a piece of music commissioned and for the Tetracono called the Tetrafono by Pietro Grossi, made with a computer. So of course, the ideas that was interesting to learn about after already embarking on a new music piece for it. Anyway, not surprising, I suppose. Another thing I found was the original drawing of the kind of diagrammatic working drawing for the Tetracono. Thought it was a nice thing. But I was there because I wanted to see the large working version of the Tetracono. I'd never seen this thing move until this point. I'd been kind of working on conjecture and working on diagram and my own imagination of what this thing might look like and how it works. Manuela had gotten out the working Tetracono. Here you see on the table both the motorized version on the left, which is 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters, and the smaller non-motorized version on the right. We spent that morning and afternoon, also searching around a bit. We found the Tetracono, but we didn't find the cord. So I couldn't see it working. And Manuela searched around quite a bit. I mean, you see this photograph, which I'll show you in a minute, but you see a cord in that. We never could get it working, and I had to head back to Milan. I was on the train going back. And Manuela ended up finding a cable and just plugging it in and seeing if it worked. And yes, it was the right cable, and yes, it worked. And she sent me this video on her iPhone, sent it to me while I was on the train on the way back to Rome, and I want to play that video here of the Tetracono finally working. So here, felt like a bit of the end of a odyssey to see this thing in motion. But immediately I looked at it, and if people are really paying attention to this, they might notice something about the way this thing is running. I did, but I've been looking at it closely for months, to the point of absurdity. Anyway, something wasn't quite right in this video, but I'm going to go on with the story for a minute. Okay. Return back to Rome, where I continued making work around this. One thing I've been busily making is just a screensaver version of that small software sketch that I made, which will be sold through my software company, ORG. I think I might also make it into an app and try to get it into the App Store so I can make my fortunes through this product, which everyone will want. Here it is anyway, running on the computer in the studio. There's another piece of work I'm making around this thing, which is that watch scan that we saw before. Dexter Sinister had made quite a large format silkscreen print of this image for an exhibition in Rome a few years ago with Colli Independent Art Gallery based in Rome. And they had printed it with a silkscreen printer outside of the city. It's quite a beautiful print. I like this print quite a lot. So I thought it would be nice to work with that same printer and make a series of prints of the Tetracono. But a series of, at least the working idea at this point, is 4 different prints, which aren't identified as being different. Maybe more than 4, we'll see. And which, look essentially the same, and they're just photographs of the Tetracono, but produced with this large format silkscreen. This actually may evolve to something else, and this is working towards a small exhibition which will be opening in Rome June 14th, where these prints will hang in the gallery on the Via Marmorata, and one will hang every day, and they get changed out every day. So again, you'll have to be paying quite close attention to notice that these have changed or care. But this is as a kind of a mark for a larger publishing project that we're set to do with them over the next year, which comes out of this and some other things. Okay. So at this point, I needed to return back to the Fondazione in Milan. This is just a couple weeks ago at this point. I needed to return back because I needed to talk to Manuela about the video she had sent me, and I also wanted to see some more material in their collection. Specifically, I wanted to see a series of catalogs they had that included the Tetracono in exhibitions. This was one that was in Graz in Austria. It was Munari titled it a design research exhibition, visual research. It features a Tetracono on the cover, also this kind of funny image of it as one of a 35 millimeter slide, which I quite like. Sorry. Another piece which we pulled out there, it was a short video aired on the television of Munari describing the Tetracono. He does it in a very straight-spoken manner, which I like. I want to play that.
Quattro motori come nel Tetracono che hanno una differenza minima di giri al secondo. La combinazione dei quattro motori più la variante nella frequenza della corrente elettrica mi dà delle combinazioni che vanno all'infinito. Quindi io metto insieme un oggetto con delle parti note che danno delle informazioni ignote, per il solo fatto che ho prodotto una componente casuale che mi dà l'imprevisto.
Another video which we pulled out was from a CD-ROM made at Danese back when CD-ROMs were made, and I thought this was quite useful because it was Munari describing the project in retrospect, and you hear him kind of chuckle at the beginning of the description. I like that quite a lot. You know, it was serious, but it wasn't very serious also, and some things work better than others is the truth. So I want to play this little bit.
Questo è il Tetracono. Questo Tetracono è nato nel momento dell'arte programmata. È un cubo che ha al suo interno quattro coni che occupano tutto lo spazio del cubo, avendo il diametro della base del cono della stessa misura del piano interno del cubo. Ogni cono ha un motore che gira molto lentamente con delle differenze minime di giri. Sono delle piccole varianti di tempo per cui le combinazioni sono sempre diverse, perché sono metà rossi e metà verdi, e ruotando si arriva dal tutto verde al tutto rosso.
So the next thing I did was I made a short video of the working Tetracono just to confirm my suspicions of what was going on with it, and we're going to watch that here. Okay. So what I noticed in the meantime, of course, was that the cones were moving not according to the scheme that was originally designed for this product. In fact, the cone that's on the bottom is rotating the wrong way. The two side cones in either corner are supposed to be rotating towards each other, and the two top cones as well. None are moving at the right speed. I've checked that against the software model. I then managed to tell Manuela about this and describe with some detail why I thought this was not working the right way, even though here I'm making the virtual one and the real one is not working the right way, but and the intent versus the kind of realization of it. And she says, well, yes, this object was renovated in 2004 for a show at the Museo del Novecento in Milan. And during that time, yes, a cover was added to it and the motorworks were renovated. Well, they weren't renovated correctly, it seems to be the case. We went back through the paperwork. Turns out she knows the person who fixed this, and he doesn't work for the lab that he worked for before, but she was still in contact with him, and we found this picture of the Tetracono at the time, disassembled, and it seems that it was just renovated to a state that it never was should have been. Now, at this point, this is about where we come up to the present moment, and at this point, Manuela has spoken to the person who renovated the Tetracono, and the lab is actually willing to go back and make it right and set it in the correct rotations and speeds. So it's a kind of funny. This part of it ends up being a bit of a historical preservation project. Although I think it's not unuseful to have this object set correctly for how it was intended to be made at the time. Of course, looking at it now, we're seeing the thing that we're dealing with has nothing to do with the context in which it was made at the time, and I don't have that much interest, but I think it's absurd and useful to have it set back to how it was running before. Okay, almost at the end. Okay. Well, so then the Tetracono, looks like it's a tool for meditation or for thinking about the way things change or taking a break or whatever it might be, or it's a useless screensaver or who knows what it is. Munari called it a design research project, and I like that description of it as well. And in fact, he described it explicitly as a multiple. And in this same book, in Obvious Code, he wrote a short, concise kind of description of how to design multiples, which I think I would like to read here just at the end. He says, how to design multiples. Multiples, and this is talking about design research as well. He says, multiples are designed with the methods of research. Unlike the artist, the designer does not make a wonderful sketch and later find some reproduction technique. He experiments on a phenomenon which is optical, physical, geometrical, typological, mechanical. He refines the elements of communication and studies the best material with which to produce the object for the maximum level of visual communication and the minimum level of cost. He finds a mechanical technique which best suits his purposes, and in the end a prototype is born. Not a unique artistic creation, but a model for the creation of a series. Reproductions of artworks are always inferior to the original, but when designing a model for mass production, the prototype is always inferior to the final products. I think that's, again, crystallized some thoughts I had previously, and reading it now, it gave me some new ideas. Because at this point, right, we're 50 years on beyond that, and we're quite a bit outside of the mode of industrial production, kind of mass production, where we're making objects, and on to kind of a time of post-industrial production, so instead of objects, we're making information. Instead of kind of cubic ashtrays, we're making like Kim Kardashian emoji or whatever it is. We're making software, we're making images, all of these things. And crucially, we're not designing prototypes for reproduction. At this point, we're working directly with the material, particularly if we're working with code or with software. So there's not a reproduction of an original artwork. There's not a design of a prototype, which gets better in serialized production, but rather it's a completely different situation. We're working within the kind of obvious code of software to make something that's both a prototype and the final thing as well. So then I think it's, I think it's useful to kind of use the Tetracono, at least for me, as a model to think around these changing modes of production, to think about differences between art and design. And I think it's more resonant 50 years later, with the cone still spinning around, changing and phasing, to meet the Tetracono now. So I think it's useful for thinking about working in cycles. It's often how I think about doing design, rather than only a narrative or thinking about endless progress or newness, or the way design often gets equated with innovation, which makes my stomach turn, where it's described more qualified by its ends rather than through its means. So I think yes, this is useful for thinking instead about continuity and depth, about phasing and production and reproduction as being kind of either face of the same process. Well, that's the end of what I have to say now. So, thank you.
I'll start.
Okay, sure.
Which is not quite a question, but I was quite intrigued by some aspects of the Tetracono that kind of, to me, reflect a little bit aspects of your own practice. And it was kind of interesting to see in the introduction some perspectives that kind of led to the Tetracono in a way. And some of the four aspects to me were kind of like keywords that in a way like the cones kind of imbricate into the structure, which are the relationship to time, to language, and to the question of the function of a design object as well, as well as the process in your own investigation, which is in a way both the research aspect, but also kind of an availability to the discoveries and basically to curiosity, perhaps even more than the process itself. So perhaps if you could give us a couple of perspectives on these keywords, because I feel like they're kind of central to your practice and also to the Dexter Sinister practice, wider scale.
Yep. Okay. Yes, for sure. The object itself is compelling to me and feels familiar because of its overlaps with my own thinking around graphic design. And so for sure, the fact that it's a product whose stated purpose is to think about things changing. And it's that is compelling to me, and you can see it in, like, say, the watch Wyoscan project, or the watch scan project, where you can see it in really more. Those use time as a subject matter. You can see it more substantially in like work that plays out over time, whether it's a publishing project that might be in a space and lasts for 3 weeks, a Dexter Sinister project, or thinking about a design practice through a longer lens than one project to the next. And so making explicit connections from one thing to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. So I'd say time is kind of like an overall, it's both a subject matter and a kind of thing that links thread through the project. So the fact that the Tetracono addresses that, I mean, embodies that in a simple and kind of like almost cartoonish manner, I like a lot. I think I also like the absurd proposal that this would be something you would live with. And so there's an optimism that's in the object that suggests we might want to just sit around and think about how things change. And I always like to think about design as being integrally tied up with optimism, like thinking about the way things can be better if they were like this. Like, this could be better if you did it like this. And so why not kind of extend that to the function of objects and say, like, yes, you could have really quote-unquote beautiful useless apps on your phone, even though you don't know when to use them or why you would use them. But I think there's something that I like about suggesting that might be a different way to be in the world. And I like categorizing that as design rather than something else. So for sure, that quality, the fact that it was a useless product, or it's kind of an artwork masquerading as a product. I mean, it was listed as described as a multiple and described as an artwork for thinking about programmatic art. So those are two things that are immediately jump to correspond to other work that I make. So.
In a way, they also kind of gravitate around one aspect that kind of then relates it to the research program that we're setting up, is perhaps the value, the poetic value, the poetry of it, as in the Roman Jacobson, diagram of the functions of language. There's this function that is poetical value that touches the question of beauty also. And I think that perhaps this is kind of the core where perhaps the practice of Bruno Munari and your practice kind of intersect as well. It's like you find beauty in certain contemplation and also in certain things that you cannot formulate perhaps in the design object. And I think there is one essay in particular that kind of echoes this. Is let me find it. The article that is titled "A Language of Signs and Symbols" as well. I don't know if you all know this article. Because I think it kind of it echoes, if you know this article, it kind of like echoes also the apps that you've been providing is somehow playing with, which is also a sign that I kind of used on the interface, the site interface of the research program, because I feel like it kind of describes, it's kind of a looking for meaning in the ways science collide to make to produce poetical value as well. And I feel like it's a nice point where, let's say, verbal and visual language kind of connect as well. And I feel like in a way, when you look at the Metafont project, it has also this sort of like fine edge between the visual and the textual quality as well. So.
Definitely. I mean, part of what I liked about the Tetracono as well is just the fact that it's a kind of literal product. Like he wrote a description of a condensed description of how the thing should work, and then it works exactly like that. And so it's a poetry of it's a thin poetry. It's a poetry of kind of just bare function and kind of absurd use. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, David, I guess your research will go on. We have a meeting with
Yes.
a fellow of Munari next month, and I don't want to spoil the story of the project to the audience or to you. Well, this object was produced in a particular moment between a reaction to inform an abstract painting and the zero, the annihilating in painting, and the wave of arte povera, which was in a way the Italian substitute for pop art. It was in a way a problematic object because, well, maybe not everybody understood what Bruno and I was explaining in the film, but he was saying it is an object that from let's say an ensemble of precise parts produces chaos because it produces never-ending configurations. So I have a question for you that is more concerning your research, design research on design research. Could be meta research on meta design, or a meta design research, which is a space for research in your practice, and how do you imagine? So you refer that this is going to be part of a launch in Rome and then New York. How do you want to further work on this, and how it will be made available?
Yeah, I think I hadn't thought about it as being design research on design research. I think that's pretty accurate, though. Yeah, and clearly that's the case. I think I'm certainly interested in the product as a departure point, and so how it may bleed out new work is maybe the most interesting thing to me. And so it, as I was describing, it will be some of the work will be presented as an exhibition, as a small exhibition. That's pretty that's pretty straightforward. It will probably be written about as well. Like I'll probably write about it in some form or the other. But then it's also going to directly, it's already affecting other design projects I'm doing right now. So I'm designing a digital sundial, or Dexter Sinister's designing a sundial and a digital equivalent of it, which will be in Denmark, in Aarhus, as part of that book series. And anyway, that project has a lot of the thinking from the Tetracono in it, both in its form, like directly in its form, and in some of the ideas that are brought about around it. I think, I enjoy having the opportunity to talk about the research while it's happening, but it's the kind of thing as a working designer, at least one with a healthy practice, like you're doing all the time. All the people I know who I respect their work, like you're doing this kind of thing. You might not have the time, the 4 months to do it, the kind of absurd luxury, not absurd luxury, the luxury you should have, yes. And but you're doing this as a matter of course. And so, so yes, I want to kind of make what I've done accessible in some way, but I don't have any instinct to kind of uncover something new about this, or to talk about Bruno Minari more widely, or I want to situate it to some degree in when it was done, but also acknowledge that we're not at that point anymore. And so I think it will trickle out a number of products, but I don't know. I don't really know. But I think that the thinking about how to make a research project is maybe one of the most fruitful things for me at this particular point. So that's kind of a thread I want to follow. Does that answer it? I'm not sure.
But already finding out that let's say the version that is at the Fondazione Danese has wrong rotation.
Yeah.
Is already amazing.
It's a gift. Yeah, it's a nice gift, but it's the kind of thing I inevitably find when I talk about my work, and I tried to do this a very different way at the beginning of this talk. I tried to just talk about the objects and not digress into a million sub-stories, but I can't help but think about all the things that happen along the way. And if you treat it, I think we all find that, and I think you can make more or less of that. And I love using the situations as they happen to like change the course of the work. So the fact that thing doesn't work and there's an opportunity to set it straight, I feel like that's just the beginning of a next set of something that's going to come out of that. Whether it's just it goes back in the Fondazione and that's it and it's perfect and next time it's shown it's correct, as it were, or something else, I don't know. So I think the more, I'll just trace it as long as it keeps on bearing fruit. It comes out of another interest, which was to do with Danese and Olivetti, which you know well, around arte programmata, etc. And once I started looking, anyway, this was a subset of that, or comes out of that. So kind of follow it where it goes.
Any other questions?
Hi, I have two questions, but I'm struggling to phrase them correctly. Yes. So maybe I'll start with the easier one. You've described this object or the idea that somebody would have this in their house as absurd at various points during your talk, and I don't quite understand why you're saying this, because it doesn't seem absurd to me to surround yourself with like a multiple that is maybe an art object or maybe occupies some liminal space, but I'm sure you have good reasons for saying that, and I'm just curious.
I think it's because, yes, I have reasons, and it's a rhetorical flourish. Like, I don't myself think it's absurd. I'd love to have it in my house, and I'd love to be surrounded by these kinds of things. I think it's absurd when presented as a consumer product in the way that it was. I think it's kind of the fact that perhaps it was not as successful as some other multiples that were made might indicate that it wasn't as successful as these things, and so it has I think it's absurd. I think it's not absurd to have a beautiful screensaver, but I know an awful lot of people who think that is absurd. I think in this room we might have a higher proportion of people who would willingly love to surround themselves with things like this. But I think if you expand out of this room as soon to a much wider audience, you start to see the kind of impossibility of it. And that's, it's just like, in that way, of course, like art, it's the impossible, irrational quality of it that's the best thing about it. But it's a useless thing that's presented as something useful. And I think that contradiction is maybe what I think would be read as absurd by other people. I don't think it's absurd at all. Yeah.
Thanks. The second question goes somewhere totally different, and I'm really... So, Munari, you read an excerpt where Munari describes the difference between reproduction and serial production, and you sort of went further and said, well, now we are not making prototypes that stand in, like, as a start for serial production anymore when we are working with digital material, but we're working directly with the material itself. So how would you then describe the idea of what, let's say, programmers call a prototype? Because then that seems still to be a thing, although they're already working sort of with the material, or maybe it's just like semantics, really.
It could be a semantic thing, but I think that's that point that I was making is the kind of nicest insight I've had in doing this. I'm not sure it's fleshed out. I'm not sure it's correct, but it's just something that doing this made me think. I think even it may just be a semantic thing, like it's a prototype, it's a software prototype. It's not yet the finished thing, but of course we know, in current software practice, the prototypes get released because the idea is you have like you release it at its bare level of functionality so that when users will help you find out what's wrong with it. So it's a slippery slope between kind of what's finished and not finished. And even that prototype works as a piece of software. It's just, it maybe doesn't work to the specifications of what they think it should be. So that thing is, it's not a prototype in that model is reproduced. That prototype, whether it's a janky piece of software or not, still works as a piece of software. There's no reproduction that goes on in that case. It's the thing, it works as it is. Is that good to it?
Yeah,
Kind of.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just trying to come up with a different word that then describes this like differently. Maybe you could see it as like if you make a first version, like just to visually design the interaction on a website, then maybe it's more useful to see it as a model or an interactive sketch than calling it a prototype. Yeah.
But yeah, for sure.
Anybody else? I had one more question that was more related to the kind of politics way to use the term useless, because you were using this kind of opposition between what can be commercialized as useful and actually considered useless, or the kind of contradiction between the two. But I kind of want to also perhaps have your point of view on the almost like the critical quality of such an object. Like in terms of like perhaps challenging the notions of function and use and useful and all these terms.
I guess I don't think I have any improvement on what was described around, say, the Danese products at the time, where they said they might equally have a aesthetic function as a practical function. And so that aesthetic function is one for contemplation, or for one for beauty, or one for whatever else, and that's just as real of a need of people as putting out your cigarette. So I don't have a better idea than that. I like that idea. I kind of adhere completely to that idea. So that quality of uselessness is something I would advocate. Yeah.
Anybody else, or we're looking at the curtain falling down? Well, thank you so much, David, again.
Okay, thank you very much.
And thank you for coming.